In the gentle light of early dawn, the storm's fury gave way to a quiet, reflective calm. The dark clouds slowly parted, revealing a sky tinged with the soft pastels of a new day. The neighborhood, still damp from the night's deluge, held its breath as if savoring the fragile peace that now enveloped it. On the modest porch, the rescued neighbor sat in silence, his head bowed and his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The echoes of the violent storm had subsided, but the impact of its events resonated deeply within him. Inside the home, the Black family gathered around the kitchen table. There was no dramatic fanfare or grand declarations, only the soft murmur of shared words and the quiet clinking of utensils. Over a simple breakfast, they spoke in hushed tones about the night's ordeal, their voices filled with both sorrow for past hurts and a cautious hope for the future. The mother, her gaze tender yet resolute, shared memories of the many times they had faced cruelty with dignity. The father's steady tone, laced with years of hard-earned wisdom, reminded everyone that true strength often comes from the ability to forgive and grow. Outside, the rescued neighbor finally broke his silence. His voice was low and trembling, yet each word carried the heavy weight of a life forever altered. I never thought I'd be on the receiving end of mercy, he confessed, the admission punctuated by the steady drip of rain from the eaves. All my life I believed that my words and actions made me strong, but tonight I learned that real strength is in accepting help, in letting someone see you vulnerable enough to change. A long pause filled the air as his words sank in. The family listened intently, their eyes reflecting both compassion and a cautious optimism. It was in that moment that the neighbor, once so steeped in arrogance and hate, began to glimpse the possibility of redemption. The scars that had once defined him, both physical and emotional, now served as a reminder of the price he had paid for his prejudice. The mother reached out slowly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "It's never too late to change," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a promise. "We all have our battles, and tonight you were given a chance to fight a different kind of battle, the one against the hate inside you." Her words, simple and sincere, seemed to kindle a spark of understanding in him. The man's eyes, once cold and defiant, now shone with a mixture of regret and quiet hope. He looked around at the family, the very people he had ridiculed so callously, and for the first time, he saw them not as targets of his scorn, but as the embodiment of what it meant to be human. In that shared silence, the neighborhood itself seemed to exhale, as if the harshness of previous days was being washed away by the slow promise of a new beginning. The rescued neighbor rose unsteadily, his movements tentative yet determined. I want to try," he whispered, barely audible over the soft background of early morning sounds. "I want to learn how to be better." A murmur of quiet approval passed among those gathered, and even the once skeptical onlookers now exchanged looks of hope and empathy. The family's unwavering compassion had not only saved his life during the storm, it had opened the door to a future where hate could be replaced by understanding. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow on faces wet with rain and emotion, the rescued neighbor stepped forward into that light. It was a small, uncertain step, but it was a step nonetheless, a step away from the toxic chains of his past and toward the promise of change. The storm had passed, but its lesson would linger forever, that no one is too far gone to learn the true meaning of strength, and that sometimes the very act of saving a life can lead to the most profound transformation of all. Outside, the world was already waking up. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the soft light and the whispers of change. The family, standing together on their porch, watched silently as the rescued neighbor walked slowly toward a new day, his head held just a little higher than before. In that quiet, transformative moment, the promise of redemption hung in the air, a promise that even the coldest hearts can thaw when touched by genuine compassion. And so, as the neighborhood stirred with the gentle promise of a new beginning, one thing was clear. The events of that stormy night would never be forgotten. They were etched into the hearts of all who witnessed them, a timeless reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of humanity can shine through, leaving us all forever changed. Every day a racist neighbor would trash-talk a proud black family, but everything changed when a sudden storm flipped his life upside down. Just when you think you've heard it all, fate throws in a twist you'll never see coming. Trust me, this story will leave you speechless. The sky had already started to darken over a quiet suburban block when the familiar hum of daily life at the neighborhood gym faded into the background. In a modest cul-de-sac, where manicured lawns and picket fences told a story of seemingly peaceful coexistence, tension simmered beneath the surface. Every day, an arrogant racist neighbor made it his mission to hurl crude insults at a proud black family who lived just a few houses down. His daily taunts, sharp, bitter, and thoughtless, had become as routine as the morning paper. On this particular day, as the afternoon light began to wane, the neighbor's mocking voice carried over the gentle rustle of leaves and distant sounds of laughter from children playing. "You call yourselves a family?" he sneered aloud, his tone laced with disdain as he leaned over his white picket fence. "Keep dreaming. You'll never amount to anything." The family, known for their quiet dignity and unwavering unity, stood in their front yard. Their eyes, filled with hurt but tempered by resilience, met his glare with calm determination. They had endured his insults day after day, letting his venomous words bounce off the strength they had built together over the years. Though their faces betrayed a flicker of pain, they never retaliated, until fate decided otherwise. As the neighbors' laughter echoed, a sudden shift in the atmosphere rippled through the neighborhood. Dark, churning clouds rolled in, and a fierce wind began to whip through the streets. Within minutes, what started as a light drizzle escalated into a violent storm. Rain pounded on roofs and the wind howled like an untamed beast, sending debris flying and shattering the familiar calm of the day. The racist neighbor, who had taken pride in his daily mockery, suddenly found himself unprepared for the storm's fury. His pristine car, parked along his driveway, was battered by hail, and the relentless wind forced him to scramble inside his own home, panic replacing his usual arrogance. In his haste and fear, he stumbled, the reality of nature's indiscriminate power crashing down on him like the very storm that now raged outside. In that moment, the proud black family, who had long been the target of his scorn, sensed something different in the air. As the wind howled and water surged around, they exchanged a look filled with quiet resolve. Without hesitation, they sprang into action. Stepping out into the chaos, they gathered blankets, turned on their porch lights, and with a compassion that defied his hateful words, rushed toward the neighbor's home. The sound of rain and thunder mingled with shouts of concern as they braved the tempest. Their faces, determined and caring, shone with an inner light that contrasted starkly with the bitterness of the insults once hurled at them. Each step they took was an act of defiance against prejudice, a powerful reminder that in the midst of nature's wrath, humanity could shine brightest. As the storm raged, fate had already set its twist in motion. The neighbor, now overwhelmed by the storm and struggling to find shelter, was about to learn a lesson in humility and unexpected grace. And although no one could predict exactly what would happen next, the promise of a life-altering transformation hung in the air, a promise that would soon leave everyone, especially him, utterly speechless. As the storm's wrath grew more relentless, the neighborhood was plunged into a chaotic symphony of howling winds, lashing rain, and thunder that shook the very foundations of every home. The racist neighbor, who had so long taken pleasure in his daily mockery, now found himself at the mercy of nature. Inside his once pristine house, panic replaced his usual smug composure. Windows rattled violently, and the roar of the storm drowned out his desperate attempts to secure loose objects. He stumbled through flooded hallways, his earlier arrogance evaporating into a cold dread. In the midst of the tempest, every mocking word he had hurled seemed trivial, as if nature itself was delivering a harsh lesson in humility. Meanwhile, across the street, the proud black family, long accustomed to enduring his spiteful taunts, now found themselves facing a challenge that demanded immediate action. Their faces, etched with both past hurt and steadfast determination, were illuminated by the erratic flashes of lightning. With hearts pounding in unison with the storm's rhythm, they exchanged silent glances, filled with resolve. It wasn't the time to hold on to grudges. This was a moment when humanity, stripped of its prejudices by nature's fury, called out for help. Without hesitation, they moved as one. Footsteps splashed through puddles, and the wind carried whispers of urgency as they rushed toward the neighbor's beleaguered home. "Hang on," one of them murmured softly, as they pressed forward through sheets of rain. Their voices, though low, were steady with resolve, a contrast to the frantic shouts of the man inside who now pleaded with fate. The family's every action exuded compassion. They fumbled with keys at the door, their gloved hands trembling not from cold, but from the overwhelming need to help. In their eyes, there was no malice, only the simple truth that when life's storm comes, pride and prejudice must give way to survival and empathy. Outside, the torrential rain blurred the edges of reality. Amid the deluge, the neighbor's frantic silhouette could be seen pressing against the door, desperation etched in every movement. The pounding of the storm seemed to hammer at his pride, until even his harsh words, once so venomous, were swallowed by the sound of nature's relentless assault. And then, in that critical moment when hope seemed as fleeting as the shifting shadows, the family reached the threshold. Their presence, bathed in the soft glow of their porch light against the dark chaos, stood as a beacon of unexpected mercy. The storm's intensity mirrored the tumult within the man's heart, now filled with fear rather than scorn. As the family's outstretched hands approached, there was a moment when the world paused. The neighbor's eyes, wide with the realization that he was no longer in control, locked onto theirs. In that fleeting instant, the harsh lines of his prejudice blurred into something vulnerable. The sound of distant thunder and the unyielding roar of the rain underscored the shift, as if nature itself demanded that hate be set aside in the face of shared humanity. Without uttering a word, the family's compassion spoke volumes. Their silent, determined offer of help, rendered even more poignant by the tempest raging around them, hinted at a twist of fate that would soon upend the neighbor's world. The raw, unpredictable power of the storm had not only exposed his fragility, but also set the stage for an act of redemption that no one could have foreseen. In that charged, uncertain moment, with rain pelting down and the winds screaming outside, the seeds of transformation were sown, seeds that would force a reckoning with long-held prejudices and ultimately leave everyone, especially him, utterly speechless. As the dark clouds gathered overhead, the gentle suburban afternoon transformed into a chaotic tempest. Rain lashed at every window, and winds howled with a relentless ferocity that shook the very foundations of the neighborhood. The racist neighbor, who had spent countless days arrogantly hurling insults from behind his white picket fence, now found himself caught in nature's merciless grip. Inside his meticulously kept home, panic replaced his habitual sneers. Hail pounded his car in the driveway, and the howling wind forced him into a frantic scramble, his steps echoing a fear he'd never known. Across the street, the proud black family, whose quiet dignity had always absorbed his daily barbs, stood together under the shelter of their modest porch. Their eyes, once clouded with hurt, now burned with a fierce resolve as the storm raged on. In that charged moment, the triviality of his daily insults faded into insignificance. The family exchanged determined glances, silently agreeing that this was no time for old grudges. With the storm intensifying, every second counted. They hurried indoors to gather what little they could, blankets, flashlights, and a well-worn first aid kit, before venturing out into the chaos. Each step on the rain-slicked pavement was a testament to their compassion. Every determined stride echoed their unwavering belief in the power of humanity over hate. The wind whipped at their faces, and rain blurred their vision, yet they pressed on with purpose. Outside, the neighbor's frantic attempts to secure his belongings became more desperate with each passing minute. The roar of the storm drowned out even his panicked shouts, and in his scramble for safety, his once dominant voice was reduced to mere whispers of regret. The swirling water and debris transformed his home into a battleground, where his arrogance was swept away by the raw force of nature. As the family reached his front door, their presence in the torrential downpour was both courageous and humbling. The intense sound of the storm was momentarily pierced by the muffled, desperate calls from within the house, a plea that was both raw and unmistakably human. In that instant, the family's compassion surged forward. They fumbled with keys, their gloved hands trembling not from the chill, but from the urgency of the moment. Every second seemed to stretch into eternity as they pressed their hands against the door, willing it to open so they could extend a lifeline. Inside, the neighbor's eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, met the determined, steady gaze of the family as the door finally creaked open. There was a moment, a heartbeat of suspended time, when the force of nature seemed to demand that hatred be left behind, replaced instead by the simple, undeniable need to save a life. In that critical juncture, the atmosphere was electric. The storm raged on outside, a relentless reminder that life is fragile and unpredictable. The family's actions were not about retribution or pride. They were a testament to the enduring power of empathy. As they reached out into the chaos, their every gesture spoke louder than any insult the neighbor had ever uttered. Though the details of what unfolded next remained hidden by the fury of the elements, the promise of a twist, a fate that would upend the neighbor's worldview and leave him utterly speechless, hung in the air. The raw energy of the storm and the selfless act of rescue had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of their lives. The door creaked open just enough for a sliver of light to cut through the darkness and torrential rain. In that suspended moment, the once mighty racist neighbor, now a figure huddled in panic, peered out with wide, terrified eyes. The storm had reduced his bluster to silence, and in its merciless fury, his carefully constructed walls of prejudice crumbled. Outside, the black family, their faces streaked with rain and determination, pressed forward through the deluge. Their movements were purposeful and unhurried despite the chaos. The urgency of their rescue transcended any lingering hurt from years of insults. With each step, their hearts pounded not with anger, but with a resolute compassion that refused to be dimmed by past bitterness. As they reached the threshold, a harsh gust of wind slammed the door open wider, and a torrent of rain spilled in. The neighbor's frantic cries for help, muffled by the howling storm, resonated in the cold night air. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to that single defining moment, a life teetering on the edge of despair, and a family's unwavering commitment to save him. In a voice soft yet laden with unspoken empathy, one family member cried out, "We're here! Hold on!" The sound of those words, barely audible above the storm's roar, carried with it the weight of countless trials endured with dignity. Without waiting for an answer, they ushered him out from the collapsing confines of his once proud home. Every splash through puddles, every determined stride, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of nature's indiscriminate wrath. Inside, the neighbor's defiant sneers and cutting insults had long been his armor. Now that armor lay shattered on the floor, replaced by raw vulnerability. As the family gathered him in their arms, their eyes filled with the quiet sorrow of forgiveness, the man's face contorted, first with disbelief, then with a dawning realization of the irony in his situation. His voice, barely a whisper, broke through the clamor of the storm. "Why? Why are you doing this?" The reply was simple and profound, coming not as an accusation but as an act of humanity. "Because every life matters," came the soft, unwavering answer. In that moment, the neighbor felt the crushing weight of his own prejudices. The realization hit him like the relentless force of the storm outside. He was utterly alone in his arrogance, left defenseless against the compassion he had never dared to expect. Tears mixed with rain as the family carried him to a safer shelter, a modest porch beneath a sagging awning, where for a few agonizing minutes the storm's fury was momentarily held at bay. There, as the family wrapped him in warm blankets and checked on his battered condition, the raw vulnerability of his predicament became painfully clear. The insults and mockery that had once bolstered his pride now seemed trivial compared to the undeniable truth of his mortality. In that fragile silence, as the storm raged on in the background, something shifted deep within him. It was not a sudden epiphany or a dramatic confession, but a quiet, wrenching acknowledgement that his life, once fueled by hate and cruelty, was now at the mercy of fate and of people he had scorned for so long. The neighbor's eyes, once so cold and disdainful, now shimmered with a mingled taste of regret and the tentative stirrings of understanding. Outside, the relentless sound of the storm became a distant roar compared to the pounding of his heart, a reminder that even in the midst of nature's fury, the power of human kindness can rewrite destinies. As the family stayed close, their silent solidarity a beacon in that chaotic night, the neighbor felt a stirring of something he had long buried, the recognition that perhaps, just maybe, there was a path forward, a path that began with humility and the willingness to change. And so, amid the ceaseless rain and the dim glow of streetlights, fate delivered its long-awaited twist. In saving his life, the family forced him to confront the cost of his own hate, a cost measured not in mere words, but in the very fragility of human existence. That stormy night, the seeds of redemption were planted deep within a heart hardened by prejudice, a promise that would, in time, grow into something neither he nor anyone else could have ever imagined. In the soft aftermath of the storm, as the relentless rain tapered into a gentle drizzle, the neighborhood emerged from its dark, tempestuous cocoon. Streetlights cast long, forgiving shadows over puddled sidewalks, and the once overwhelming roar of nature had softened into a rhythmic patter against rooftops. On the modest porch where the black family had sheltered their rescued neighbor, a profound silence now reigned, a silence filled with unspoken truths and the raw residue of human vulnerability. The rescued man sat on the edge of the worn wooden step, wrapped in a faded blanket, his trembling hands still clutching remnants of his shattered pride. His eyes, once fierce with unyielding disdain, now shimmered with tears that spoke of regret, fear, and an emerging understanding. Every droplet on his face mirrored the weight of years spent in arrogant isolation, now washing away the hardened layers of prejudice. In that quiet, uncertain moment, he was forced to confront the truth that his life, once bolstered by hateful bravado, was fragile, a realization that reverberated in the stillness of the post-storm night. Across from him, the family sat in a tight, protective circle. Their expressions were a blend of relief, compassion, and a subtle sadness born of long-held hurt. The mother's eyes, deep and warm, reflected both the tenderness of forgiveness and the sorrow of past injustices. The father's steady gaze and the resilient, if pained, look in their child's eyes spoke of years spent enduring cruelty, yet of a spirit that refused to be broken. Together, they embodied a quiet strength that had not only saved a life, but had also shone a light into the darkest corners of a hateful heart. As minutes turned into hours, the rescued neighbor's mind churned with tumultuous reflections. He replayed every insulting word he had once spat with pride, now rendered hollow by the raw compassion that had come to his aid. His thoughts swirled like the dissipating storm clouds above, memories of a past filled with bluster and cruelty colliding with the unmistakable truth of this night. In the silence that followed, he began to realize that the act of saving him was not one of pity, but of genuine humanity, a gesture that transcended old enmities. In a voice barely above a whisper, he finally spoke, a tentative murmur that broke the stillness. I never thought I'd be here," he confessed, the words trembling with both disbelief and sorrow. His tone was not angry or resentful, but laden with a painful clarity. The family, huddled close and listening intently, did not judge. They simply absorbed his confession, understanding that transformation rarely comes without a heavy cost. The mother reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm, a silent promise of hope and second chances. Though no grand statements were made, the simple warmth of her touch carried more meaning than any spoken apology could. It was a moment of shared humanity, a reminder that even the most wounded souls could begin to heal when met with genuine care. Outside, as the storm's last echoes faded, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual quiet and the faint glow of porch lights that now symbolized something much greater than shelter from the rain. Whispers of the night's events drifted through the cool air, carrying with them hints of change and the possibility that long-held prejudices might finally be challenged. In the hours that followed, the rescued neighbor remained on the porch, caught in a limbo between what he had been and what he could become. His mind wandered to the countless times he had jeered at the family, a habit so ingrained that it had almost become a part of his identity. Now, faced with the stark reality of his mortality and the selfless act of those he had scorned, he felt the stirrings of a transformation that was as painful as it was necessary. Inside the family's modest home, the air was heavy with reflective silence. Later that evening, as they sat together sharing a simple meal by candlelight, a humble repast that contrasted with the earlier chaos of the storm, the rescued man listened intently as the family recounted stories of their own hardships. Each tale was a thread woven into a larger tapestry of resilience, compassion, and unyielding hope. Their voices, soft and earnest, offered him a glimpse into a world where dignity and unity triumphed over hate. It was in that moment, over shared bread and quiet conversation, that the seed of remorse took root in his heart. With every word spoken by the family, he began to see the possibility of redemption, not as a grand, sweeping transformation, but as a gradual, often painful process of self-realization. The realization that his life, once defined by cruelty and ignorance, could be rewritten through the simple, powerful acts of empathy and kindness. The rescued neighbor's eyes, now dim with the weight of his introspection, met those of the family, and in that unspoken exchange lay a promise. That change was possible, even for someone as lost as he had been. The storm had passed, but its impact would forever linger, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, the light of compassion can forge a new path forward. And so, as the night deepened and the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft hues, the man began to understand that he had been given a rare gift. Not the gift of pity, but the gift of a chance to shed the burden of hatred and, perhaps, to learn what it truly meant to be human. The promise of that transformation, as fragile as it was profound, left everyone in that silent moment with a shared understanding that even the coldest hearts can thaw when touched by genuine care.